Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 138 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin, and before we get into this episode, Mike and Fia are elsewhere doing their fun things. So this is a post-recording Gavin, editing Gavin, if you will. And there were a couple of things that I just wanted to mention about this episode before we get into the actual meat of the episode. So it's a wonderful guest episode that we had. A couple of really awesome guests from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It was a wonderful interview, but there were a couple things that they didn't get the chance to plug basically during the outro of the episode. So they sent me some extra information that they wanted me to pass along onto you guys, so I thought I'd just lay it out here at the front. The main thing being sort of the nonprofit or the organization or fund. I don't remember exactly how they refer to it during the actual interview part of the podcast, but they talk about this nonprofit that they've created called the Ankizi Fund. So you can find that if you have any charitable dollar donations burning a hole in your pocket right now. You can find that at www.ankizy.org. There'll be a link to it down below in the show notes as well. That is the website for the Madagascar Ankizi Fund. Ankizi means children in Malagasy, the local language of Madagascar. But yeah, so it's this charitable organization that they created to sort of help some of these communities that they do some of this paleontology and other science in. To help them give back to the community for allowing access to these wonderful fossils and all of this wonderful science, which is a really, really great thing. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, give that at least a click just to check it out. Personal favor to me. And with that, I really enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you will as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 138 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Gavin. Our usual two co-hosts are elsewhere. Fia's working on her grad school stuff, and Mike is probably hosting trivia. I'm not sure what he does on Sunday nights, but in lieu of them, we have two wonderful guests here for this episode. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. We'll start with Dr. Krause.
Hi, I'm Dave Krause. I'm a paleontologist at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I'm a curator there. I've been there for about 7.5 years. And before that, I had a 34-year career in the Department of Anatomical Sciences at Stony Brook University, teaching human gross anatomy to medical and dental students, but also doing research.
Yeah, that's a big path that a lot of people don't think about for paleontologists is human anatomy. That was a big thing that I was sort of told after grad school. Is like, hey, if you get a job teaching anatomy, don't at all feel bad that you're not doing paleontology.
Yeah, and it's been a mechanism. It's a tool in the toolbox that allowed me to get a job so that I could do paleontology. But of course, there is a connection too in the sense that we work on vertebrate animals, and the best known vertebrate animal of all is the human animal. And so we can apply that to other vertebrates.
Absolutely. And Sierra, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Sierra Swenson, and I am an assistant collections manager at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, specifically working on the Madagascar project with Dave. And my background is actually in geology, sequence stratigraphy, and paleobiology, so kind of looking more at environments and communities.
Awesome. Yeah, and so the three of us haven't talked too much before we started recording here, so just so you all have a little background information on me. So other than what our mutual friend Rudy, who's been on the podcast as well, what he may have told you. So I got my master's in paleontology at the South Dakota School of Mines, overlapped with Rudy there for a year. And my particular research interest was like mid-late Miocene, constraining sort of the dates on this one particular gravel quarry in central South Dakota. Yeah, working on lots of horses, lots of camels, some rhinos, a weird Gomphotherium hyoid, just kind of out of nowhere, which was pretty exciting to see. But yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at. You guys do some stuff way older than what I'm used to working with. But yeah, so as Sierra mentioned, you guys work on what Sierra called the Madagascar project. So tell us a little bit about that.
Go for it, Dave. That's all you.
Okay. So yeah, why Madagascar? Madagascar fascinated me as a young assistant professor, and I started a project there in 1993. And it fascinated me because Madagascar has a highly endemic, highly unique fauna and flora. About 98% of the backboned terrestrial vertebrates that live on Madagascar today are unique to the island, found nowhere else in the world, and that includes things like the signature group, the lemurs. And
Right.
I was curious about how they got there, when they got there, and from where. And that is the kind of question that paleontology can theoretically address. And so the goal was, since I'm primarily a mammalian paleontologist, to see if we could find the proto-lemurs and the proto-tenrecs, for instance. And that was the goal that we embarked on in 1993 with a little bit of seed money from the National Science Foundation and a couple of colleagues that I was able to entice to go with me, as well as 3 or 4 graduate students.
Awesome. So, seeing as you're the PI, I assume, on most of this work, so Sierra, what is that you do as sort of the non-PI person on the project?
So one of the cool things about the project that Dave didn't mention is that it's always been very collaborative with folks in Madagascar. And in order to make research on these animals more equitable, um, we're planning to send half of the collection, including all of the holotypes, back to Madagascar. And as a collections manager, I'm kind of helping prep everything for that journey.
Okay.
So doing a lot of curation, cataloging, rehousing, all kinds of things.
Awesome. Yeah, for any of our listeners who might not be steeped in the biology and paleontology themselves, holotype is one of the most important types of fossils that there is. It's sort of the first one that was named for a given species or genus. And so that's the one that is used to compare any new ones that are found to make sure that they are the same species. So it's really important that those are kept safely and in perpetuity so that all future finds could be compared to that one. So yeah, doing work with holotypes is always super, super important. But yeah, I guess we'll sort of get into the nitty gritty of this episode is the reason Rudy sort of tipped me off to talking to you guys is because especially in the last handful of years, the whole concept of helicopter science has become a much more talked about issue. And that's something that obviously I think it's our stances on a lot of these things are not hidden from our viewers, our listeners. Helicopter science is bad. So first of all, before we get too much more into it, how would you define helicopter science?
Essentially, researchers from European and North American institutions, in other words, relatively well-off institutions going into developing countries. And here's where the analogy with a helicopter comes in. They drop into the developing country and essentially take, whether it's data or specimens or whatever, without engagement with the local researchers and without engagement with local communities.
Yeah, and that can really be extended to any two countries that have a relative power imbalance between them.
Yeah, even though I, was in grad school not all that long ago, we didn't really talk about it all that much. We talked about it in a sort of different way in our relationship to the local Native American tribes as well. And so, like you said, any two groups with some kind of power imbalance, there needs to be conversations had about who exactly has the rights to what, or even just where things should be, whether or not someone has the legal justification to take, whether or not that's the right thing to do. But yeah, so I guess, how do you guys go about working with the local scientists in Madagascar? Because I know whenever I see it talked about, there's a lot of people who, are just playing devil's advocate, even though I'm sure that's actually what they think. Saying things like, how will the fossils be properly taken care of? And what if they don't have the funding for XYZ? So how do you guys go about, working with your collaborators in Madagascar?
Well, I think to provide a little more background on that, I should have elaborated perhaps on my first answer, which is that we hit a mother lode of fossils. I really didn't expect we'd do that well. We found mammals which were extremely rare in the entire 35 million years of the late Cretaceous in the southern hemisphere. This was actually only the third site in all of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent of Gondwana, that yielded fossils. And we found the mammals, but we also found just a host of other really, really cool vertebrate animals, and almost all of them were new to science. All of them were bizarre in some sense because they had been evolving in isolation for about 20 million years. That's when Madagascar became an island in the Indian Ocean. And so scientifically, these fossils were extremely valuable. And we recognized that pretty early on. And we, I'm not saying that we've done everything right. We've made mistakes
Right.
along the way, and we've learned a great deal. But I will say that in the context of helicopter science and recognizing that helicopter science has been going on long before helicopters were ever invented, in the sense that it was coupled with colonialism. A lot of
Right.
European countries developing countries, including Madagascar, by the French in 1896, making it a colony. And Madagascar is now an independent country as of 1960. But we obviously didn't want to be labeled as neo-colonialists. And from the outset, I'd like to think that we at least had the principles right, and that we did try to involve local researchers in our research, and we tried to engage with the local communities in various ways, and we can both explain that a little bit more if you wish. And we wanted to make the discoveries that we made known to the Malagasy public, because there's obviously a very rich natural heritage in Madagascar, and the local people don't necessarily know much about it. And here, for context, Madagascar is not a tiny island with only a few people in it. It's a huge island.
Yeah.
We are in Colorado. It's over twice the size of Colorado, and it has about 30 million people. And in many ways, they're some of the most forgotten people in the world. And Madagascar itself is one of the very poorest. The most recent relative number is about the fourth poorest country in the world.
Wow.
So there's little education, especially in rural areas, and so there's great need, and those are, I think, the three main ways in which we try to engage. And I guess most importantly, we've done everything legally. In other words, we've interacted with the Malagasy government. We have explicit permits to do the research, and we have collaboration agreements with our colleagues at the main university in Madagascar, which is the University of Antananarivo. So everything we've done is quote unquote legal, and we've engaged with the local researchers. We train Malagasy students. I'm not remembering the exact numbers, but I think we've trained about 10 master's students in Madagascar, students from the University of Antananarivo, and 3 PhD students, and a fourth is about to graduate in 2 weeks.
Wow. That's awesome. But yeah, so I guess tell us a little more about how some of your interactions with the local communities there, because obviously, the local people know the rocks better than somebody from some other country will. So I'm sure working with them is really important to just finding things to begin with. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was pretty apparent the level of poverty. It's a level of poverty that unless you've been there, it's almost impossible to imagine. Um, Nobody in the village, the main village where we worked and established a study area, the brief study area, nobody in that village, adults or children, could read or write when we arrived. And we'd get to know their children really well because they'd always be following us. They weren't in school, so they'd follow us around. They were curious about us. We obviously looked differently than they do. We had things that they'd never seen before, like pens and paper, and then a little later cameras and things like laptop computers and things like GPS units. And of course, since they didn't have an education,
Right.
some of those were pretty mystifying. I mean, imagine trying to explain to somebody who doesn't have an education that you're holding something in your hand and it's telling you exactly where you are on Earth because it's sending up a signal to something that you can't see and it's bouncing back down to Earth. So um, the bottom line is that we got to know these people really well. We became close to children, and we'd come back in a following year, and many of those children weren't there anymore because they had passed from easily treatable diseases like respiratory infectious or diarrheal disease, and malaria is a big killer. And so it was just a no-brainer to find out ways we could help. And in one of the early years, I held a meeting with the local villagers, and this pings off of a point that you made, which is that the locals know the rocks. They know where there are bones. They told us where some bones were, and they helped us do some of the field work for which we, employed them, and that was a source of income for them. And so we just had the meeting, and I asked the basic question. You've been very kind to us and welcomed us into your community. How can we help you? And I really didn't know what to expect. And the answer
Right. Yeah.
was, our kids need an education. They recognize that education was the key to future prosperity for their kids. And, any of us who are parents, want the best for our kids. And so they said they would like me to start a school. And of course, I wasn't quite prepared for that. I was just there to find fossils.
Right.
And so my next question was, well, how much would that cost? And they said at that time, $500 a year to hire a teacher. So that was, and I have to emphasize per year,
Mhm.
$500. And so that was a no-brainer. We went back to
Yeah.
camp and collected $500, and we hired a teacher, and that's how the first school started. And jump ahead to today, and we've now built 6 schools, and many of the kids have gone through the primary schools and into the secondary school, and we've tried to enable the highest achieving students to then go to the nearest city to high school and even to university. And it's especially rewarding to know that some of them now have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and are coming back into the very same community where nobody could read and write in 1993, and they're applying their education. And we have, for instance, a lady who's a paramedic and a midwife. We have a young man who started a women's permaculture association so that the women can grow protein-rich crops that they didn't realize could be grown. And we are now in the midst of supporting one young man to build a fish farm to provide much needed protein. So I'm giving you a very long-winded answer,
Right.
and I'm sure Sierra can embellish upon that. Even though she has not been there yet, she's going there in less than 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
A few days.
Yeah, in 3 days, and she will see some of those things for herself. But she has been so involved in helping in numerous different ways to just bolster the Anchisi Fund, and more than anything to work with local researchers and provide training to them in things like collections management and fossil preparation.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks for giving me a good segue there, talking about collections management. So yeah, how complicated is it to manage a collection from, a place that you have never been?
It's it's been very complicated at times. I mean, a lot of the other collections we have at the museum are much more local, so from the United States and in particular from the West. So they're places that a lot of the folks who work at the museum have been multiple times. And so, coming into Madagascar was interesting. I will say I did have a little bit of background in it. My mentors at Macalester College, where I did my undergraduate degree, Christy Curry Rogers and Ray Rogers, both have a long history with the project as well.
Oh, okay.
So I did get to, hear stories about it, and I've read papers before coming to the museum. So it was kind of a cool, this kind of serendipitous thing to be able to join the project in a sideways way. But
Yeah,
it's a 30-year long project. So there's a
right.
lot of complexity and inconsistency. Sorry, Dave. But things happen. Different people have different ways of doing things, and the result is messy sometimes. So definitely challenging. And then you also want to find ways that, or we have wanted to find ways to do this collaboratively with folks in Madagascar as we progress. And Dave mentioned part of that was having Bakuli, who is the graduate student who's about to get her PhD, hopefully next week, fingers crossed for Bakuli, uh, who was at the museum for about a year, and she spent a lot of time learning prep from our amazing prep folks at the museum, but she also spent a lot of time downstairs learning collections management practices with myself and all the other folks downstairs in the basement. And it'll be really cool to go and see her again and continue that work with her.
Yeah. And so a lot of people who aren't in paleontology or know any paleontologists, their vision in their head of paleontologists are out in the field. And while, yeah, that is a lot of fun. But that's not even close to where the bulk of the work is done. And so what are some things as a collections manager and preparator that you've sort of worked with and different ways to work collaboratively with because I know Rudy also had mentioned to me there and I don't remember if you had mentioned this or not earlier, but working on like repatriating some of the specimens as well, and working on, oh, you did, sending some of the holotypes back to Madagascar. So how does that kind of work?
So let's see, some of the things that we do to work collaboratively. The repatriation is the process is interesting because normally when you're at a museum and you're curating items, you're cataloging them for your institution, but in this case, we have to divide every taxa as equally and equitably as possible so that half of it can go back to Madagascar. And that's where I really rely on Dave's expertise and the expertise of other experts who work on those taxa to make those decisions. And then another kind of interesting thing comes up, which is normally we would catalog all of our specimens on a software like EMU, KEEMU, which is what our museum uses and many other natural history museums use. But because half of it is going back to Madagascar, we needed to find a solution where they would be able to have the same level of access as us throughout that cataloging process, and then be able to take over once all of those things were in Madagascar. And I was actually not part of this initial solution. I wasn't at the museum yet, but our collections manager and the other assistant collections manager, Kristen McKenzie and Nicole Nuyegel, helped get us set up with Symbiota, which is another data management software, but it's web-based. So you
Okay.
can access it from the internet, which is a little different. There's aspects of EMU that you can access from the internet, but not all of it. It's not quite the same. So Symbiota lets us put all of our specimens that are going back to the University of Antananarivo on online, basically, and I can access it in the exact same way that somebody in Madagascar can access it. They see the same things as me, have the same ability to change things and update things. And that's something that Bakuli and I spent a lot of time learning together in some ways and cataloging. Um, we had absolutely no specimens in Symbiota when I started, and now we have over 2,000 specimens in Symbiota, which is a huge jump, and Bakuli was a huge part of that. And um, yeah, so that was an important thing in creating that collaboration and in getting them returned, is to have that record all set up before they go back.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that must be very important, especially with, like you said, some of these holotypes, because that's a long journey for them to make, and a lot of stuff can go wrong.
Yeah, that
Um,
was step number one, was getting the holotypes into Symbiota. That was the first thing we did. So
so what kind of facilities do they have at that university? Because I know one of the things that I hear, people who might not necessarily be against repatriating specimens, but sort of quibble about it, is saying, how will they be taken care of in a place
mhm.
like insert, a country with less income here?
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, again, slightly before my time, but in collaboration with the museum, uh, a, a ton, I don't know the exact number, but the museum was able to donate many kind of cabinets and a bunch of, kind of the equipment that we use, archival boxes and foam. And I know that we've donated a lot of prep materials as well, prep tools, so that they could have a setup that would be safe for these fossils when they return to Madagascar. And of course, it's probably not going to be the same as at a large museum in the United States, but
Right.
it's going to allow them to preserve these fossils for as long as the research continues. And I'm sure it will continue to improve as well.
Yeah, it has been a long journey, and as part of that journey, it's actually been like a four-step process, and we're at about um, three and a half now, I guess. The first step actually being to build the facility. So
Mm,
when I was at Stony Brook University, I was able to obtain some funding from the university to build a collections facility at the University of Antananarivo, and that involved two large rooms as well as a classroom for teaching. And the second step was getting those steel case specimen cabinets, which were gently used at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And we had just built a new collections facility with different kinds of cabinets. And so we were able to have them transported to the University of Antananarivo. And the third step is the one that Sierra is so intimately involved with, which is training and having the training of our colleagues and graduate students at the University of Antananarivo. And Sierra is going to be doing more of that on her trip to Madagascar next week. And the fourth stage, which will dribble out over a number of years, is actually returning the specimens. And I'm going to ping off another point you made, which is that it's true that specimens in a developing country will always be somewhat more vulnerable than they are in one of our own facilities for a whole number of reasons.
Right.
Um, and it's actually an argument for what we are doing. Again, some people may quibble with this, but we feel it's appropriate to divide the collection um, so that researchers in the eastern half of the world can see them in Madagascar. The people in the western part of the world can see them at the Denver Museum. We actually cataloged some specimens in the Field Museum of Natural History as well before I
Okay.
came to Denver. But the point to be made here is that there's over the course of time, natural history museums have suffered a whole
Oh
range
yeah.
of calamities, fires, floods, insurrections, and so on and so forth. And it's something like 57 institutions have suffered badly. Some of them completely destroyed in the process. So there's value in dividing up collections, and that could happen at the Denver Museum of Nature and
Oh
Science
yeah.
too. The whole place could burn down, and then we'd have to rely on. I'm sorry, Sierra, but
Don't scare me.
stuff happens, and that would mean that the only remaining representation of 30 years of collecting, which is somewhere in the range of 25,000 specimens, is in Madagascar.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember the most recent big sort of tragedy that I remember was, I think, I don't remember which university it was, but I think it was in Brazil.
It was.
Uh, and that was, I just remember reading about all of the, beautiful specimens and holotypes of species that I've learned about all sorts about, just totally gone. Uh, and so, yeah, that's like you said, I'm sure some people who are on one side or the other quibble that they should all go back to Madagascar. But yeah, that's an excellent sort of counterpoint there. Actually, I have one more specific sort of question here for Sierra. So some of the trainings that you have done, has it been online at all? Or I know you said the one student, I'm very bad at remembering names.
Bakuli.
Bakuli, thank you. Came to the Denver Museum and trained there. Do you do any trainings with them online, or have you done anything like that?
We haven't actually done anything like that yet, but in this trip to Madagascar, Bakuli and I are actually going to lead a workshop on using Symbiota. I think the thing is that we're not, as I would like to progress this, and I think that doing more trainings is going to be important, but we're not at the point yet where there are specific students or staff members at the university who are designated to work on this collection.
Okay.
And um, so sometimes that is maybe why we've delayed it a little bit. And also, frankly, this past year is the first time that any of us at the museum have even dug into Symbiota in a real way. So
Gotcha.
yeah. So working with Bakuli on it, I mean, I learned it, and then maybe a month later, Bakuli learned it from me. So we're still in early
Sure.
stages of understanding the full capabilities and putting together workflows and all those kinds of things. So, but yeah, I would really like to do more things like that.
And there's a foundational aspect to this too, which is that it's not particularly practical to do internet training because internet access in Madagascar is very limited. In fact,
Right.
electricity is very limited, even at the universities. And so that's hard to do. What we have done historically is do some workshops and do some symposia in Madagascar whenever we're there to do fieldwork as well. But Sierra is going to be taking it to a new and much higher level that we hope will allow us to do web-based collections management into the future.
Okay. And so when you do these kinds of symposia or anything, are they just for sort of the academic, staff of the university, or are they sort of open to the public as well?
There's been both. I mean, so there's been public talks as well as kind of university-based talks. And we've done other things, again, to engage the public and to make them aware of their natural heritage. We've erected roadside displays in our field area, and it's actually along a main road towards a tourist area. And we've written colored pamphlets in Malagasy and distributed them for free. We've donated casts of skulls and skeletons that are in museums there. One actually was for a while in the presidential palace. So we've done a number of things to engage the public as well as our university colleagues.
Yeah, that's really terrific. Yeah, so like I said, I think that's kind of all the bullet points that I really wanted to hit. Do you guys have any things you'd like to say about the project that you haven't gotten to say yet?
I'll just say how cool it's been to work on a project that has this kind of focus, that I'm specifically preparing things to go back, and that is the purpose, and there's no waffling about that from the people who are involved. And I think it's very common in paleo, to not really think about whose cultural resource you're taking away from a community, and then B, to not waffle about giving it back, which
Right.
is what makes this project really cool. And like Dave said, that definitely hasn't ever been perfect, but at least we're trying to do something. Um, and it's so important for the people in the countries that these resources come from to be able to benefit from them and learn from them to the same degree that we get to here. So,
Yeah.
been really cool.
Um, I guess that sort of made me think of a quick question. Have you gotten any, pushback or comments or anything about like local folks around Denver about these fossils that, they've, you know, that the museum has currently that are being sent back? Any local folks to you guys that have said anything, or even sort of in the academic community?
I don't think they have, but as you probably know, the emphasis on neocolonialism in paleontology is pretty strong in the last 5 or 10 years, and that's coming through the print media. It's coming through social media. It's coming even from other paleontologists, and for the most part, they're spot on. This is something that should be that attention should be drawn to. Um, and I guess I will say in closing that obviously I'm no spring chicken, and I've been doing this for a while, and it's absolutely wonderful to have buy-in to these ideas and concepts. I mean, without hesitation, by people like Sierra and Rudolph, and I value that so greatly. And the last thing I'll say is that I really appreciate your interest in having a podcast about this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's always been, you know, important to me because, especially somebody who's, I like I said, having gone to graduate school in South Dakota and seeing how closely my advisor works, not, every year, but when it comes up, the local Native American groups and how it's still that sort of neo-colonialism that, especially with things, in South Dakota, particularly things like bison remains that a lot of the Native American groups all lay claim to, and sort of working out how to make everybody happy and preserve the science while also getting those cultural remains where they belong, and seeing that delicate balance that needs to be done. And I like you said, pointed out really great just how some of the younger folks coming into paleontology just without hesitation. The only people that I kind of see quibble about it are people who are not paleontologists.
Right.
But yeah, so again, thank you both so much for taking the time on a Sunday evening to talk to some dinky little podcast like we have here. I really appreciate it.
No, this was fun. I'm glad that you're interested in it, and hopefully gets the story out there to people to think more about.
Yeah,
Yeah. Again, thanks for your interest.
Yeah.
absolutely. Hello, this is once again Editing Gavin here for the outro. Just wanted to give a little bit of an update about just some life stuff that Mike Fiat and I are up to. So this time of year, mid-June, is one of the busiest times of the year for Mike Fiat and I, because this is when the organization that we all volunteer for, that we met at, Hobie, has all of our, leadership seminars. That's the whole point of Hobie, is to teach sophomores in high school how to make positive changes in their communities. And this time of year is when we do it. So the upcoming podcast schedule might be a little bit wonky, including the next episode, which we have planned for an interview with some other folks from the Denver Museum. So when that comes out, unsure. Ideally, you'll never notice, the delay, but it may be that we might have to delay another week But yeah, it's for a good cause. It's for teaching the youths how to make the future not suck so bad. Yeah. So with that, thank you all for listening. Thanks, big thanks again to Dave and Sierra. Really awesome conversation we had here. But yeah, so with that, I have been Gavin. Mike and Fia may be back next episode. We'll see. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Until then, take care, everybody. This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Fenella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.